Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to relocate. The private dining room has been reassigned for the evening. Conrad Ames did not raise his voice. He looked at the general manager standing across the reservation podium and asked, quietly and precisely, whether the name on the booking had changed. It had not. He had confirmed it himself that morning when the hostess had read the details back to him over the phone. Conrad Ames, party of 2, private dining room, 7 o'clock. He had asked her to note the occasion, the 9th anniversary of his wife Rachel's birthday, and the 2nd year since her passing. The hostess had said she was sorry for his loss and that she would have a small arrangement of white flowers placed on the table. The same flowers the restaurant had always brought during every visit Conrad and Rachel had made in the years before the illness. The flowers were already on the table. Conrad had seen them when the host opened the door to the private dining room and showed them inside. That was 4 minutes ago. Now Duncan Ware, the general manager of Alderton House, was standing between Conrad and the private dining room with a practiced expression of professional regret. Conrad Ames was 42 years old. He had driven to the restaurant in a truck that needed a new side mirror. He was wearing a gray flannel shirt, clean but faded at the collar, and a pair of dark work pants he had pressed himself that afternoon, while his daughter Ivy sat on the kitchen counter watching him and asking questions about photosynthesis. His hands had the kind of wear that comes from years of physical labor, and the jacket he had brought was the same one he wore on every occasion that required more than a flannel shirt. Ivy stood beside him now in a pale yellow dress, holding a small white envelope against her chest with both hands. Inside it was a birthday card she had made herself, colored pencils, careful handwriting, a drawing of 3 stick figures standing in front of a restaurant. Her mother's name was written along the bottom in letters that sloped slightly to the left. She had been working on it since Tuesday. Duncan cleared his throat and explained that a party of 8 had requested the private room for a business dinner. The reservation had been made through a corporate account, and given the size of the party and the nature of the booking, management had determined that the arrangement served the restaurant's interests more effectively. Conrad told him that he had made his reservation 3 weeks ago. Duncan said he understood that and that the restaurant deeply regretted any inconvenience. He offered a table in the main dining hall near the window and described it as very comfortable. From somewhere behind Duncan's shoulder, a voice carried through the corridor. "Tell me that situation is handled, Duncan. My clients are waiting." Marlowe Easton stepped into the entryway, wearing a silk blazer the color of champagne and a watch that cost more than most people's cars. She was the managing director of Easton Property Group, and she moved through spaces the way people do when they have spent decades being told that their time was worth more than everyone else's. She looked at Conrad once, at his faded collar, at the child beside him, and then back at Duncan with an expression that made the evaluation unmistakably clear. "Is there a problem?" she asked. Duncan began to explain that he was relocating a previous booking to accommodate her party. Marlowe did not wait for him to finish. She turned to Conrad and offered a smile that contained no warmth. "We have 14 new units going on the market next month," she said, as if Conrad had asked. "This dinner is a business necessity. I'm sure you understand." Conrad looked at her without answering for a moment. Then he asked Duncan to confirm in plain terms that his confirmed reservation for the private room was being canceled to accommodate a party with no prior claim to that specific room. Duncan said the word operational several times. He's mentioned flexibility. He said the main hall table was perfectly suitable for a dinner of 2. Conrad turned to Ivy. She was looking at the closed door of the private dining room. Through the frosted glass panel beside it, the white flowers were just visible in the candlelight. She had not said anything since Duncan appeared. Her fingers had tightened around the envelope, and there was a stillness in her face that Conrad recognized. The particular stillness of a child deciding whether or not to cry in front of strangers. He placed one hand on her shoulder and told her they were going to sit down. He told her everything was fine. They followed the host to the main hall table. It was near the window, as Duncan had promised, and it had a decent view of the street outside. Ivy set the envelope beside her water glass and looked at it without speaking. From the private room, the sound of Marlowe Easton's business congratulations filtered through the wall at steady, indifferent intervals. A server named Dara arrived at their table. She was young, probably 25, and she had watched the conversation at the podium from across the room. She set down the menus without saying anything unnecessary, but when she straightened, she looked at the envelope on the table and then at Ivy. "That's a beautiful card," she said. Ivy looked up. "It's for my mom. Today would have been her birthday." Dara paused for half a second longer than she needed to. "I'll make sure tonight is special," she said, and she said it like she meant it. After Dara left, Ivy looked at her father. "Why didn't you tell him he couldn't do that?" she asked. She did not say it with anger. She said it the way children ask about things they genuinely cannot explain, with a careful puzzlement, as if she was still assembling the pieces and needed one more. Conrad folded his hands on the table. He thought about the white flowers sitting in the private room in the candlelight, arranged for a dinner that was no longer happening. "Because," he said, "if I had pushed back in a way that forced them to move, they would have done it for the wrong reason." Ivy turned that over. "What's the wrong reason?" "They would have moved because they were afraid of something, not because it was right." He looked at her steadily. "A table doesn't mean much. What happened tonight means something. Whether they understand what they did, that's what matters more than where we sit." Ivy was quiet for a moment. She looked at the envelope. "Mom would have been mad," she said. Conrad smiled, just slightly. "Yeah," he said, "she would have." They ordered dinner. Dara brought Ivy a sparkling water with a lemon slice without being asked, and when she returned with the first course, she slipped a small white flower onto the edge of Ivy's plate, one she had quietly taken from the arrangement at the host stand. Conrad noticed. He said nothing, but he remembered her name. 40 minutes into the meal, the front door opened, and Lawrence Sutton walked into Alderton House without a reservation, without a jacket, and without prior notice. He was the president of Meridian Hospitality Partners, the private equity group that had acquired the Alderton House restaurant chain 3 years ago. He conducted unannounced operational visits twice a year to each property in the portfolio, sitting down, observing the service, reading how a room ran without the advantage of a warning. He had come alone tonight because that was how he always did it. The host began the welcome greeting. Lawrence scanned the dining room the way he always did, checking table arrangement, reading the service rhythm, observing the staff under ordinary pressure. He stopped when he reached the window table. Conrad Ames was cutting a small piece of chicken for Ivy, who was telling him something about her science class with the focused enthusiasm of a 9-year-old who has decided an adult is genuinely listening. He was leaning toward her slightly. His jacket was hung on the back of the chair. The envelope sat beside Ivy's water glass, next to the small white flower from Dara. Lawrence crossed the main hall without asking the host to follow. "Conrad," he said. Conrad looked up. His expression did not shift immediately, the particular stillness of someone who understands that a situation is about to change and is deciding how to hold it. "Lawrence," he said. Ivy looked between them. Lawrence took in the scene without needing it explained. The main hall table, the flannel shirt, the frosted glass panel on the private dining room door where the light was warm, and the sound of laughter was unmistakably self-satisfied. He understood the shape of the evening before Conrad said a word about it. "You're out here," Lawrence said. It was not a question. "We were relocated," Conrad said. He set his fork down evenly. "The private room was reassigned after we arrived." Lawrence stood without speaking. His jaw was set. Ivy leaned slightly toward her father. "Do you know him, Dad?" she whispered. Conrad told her Lawrence was someone he worked with. The review that followed was not announced. Lawrence asked Duncan Ware for the reservation records, and Duncan produced them with the confidence of a man who did not yet understand what was coming. The records showed Conrad Ames confirmed reservation, private dining room 19 days prior. The records showed the Easton Property Group request, submitted to the corporate liaison desk that same afternoon, explicitly asking for the private dining room for an 8-person business dinner. The records showed a modification entered under Duncan's employee account at 6:47 in the evening, 13 minutes before Conrad walked through the door, reclassifying the Easton event as a priority corporate booking and moving Conrad's confirmed reservation to main hall availability. No cancellation notice had been sent, no phone call, no offer of an alternative. The room had been turned over before Conrad arrived. Lawrence asked Duncan what operational justification had led him to cancel a confirmed seated reservation without contacting the guest. Duncan said the Easton account was a significant corporate relationship. He said the private room was better suited for 8 people. He said he had intended to call Conrad, but the transition had moved quickly. Lawrence asked whether he had considered that the guest he had moved had a confirmed reservation, a specific room on record, and an occasion documented in the booking notes. Duncan said he had weighed all of that. Lawrence asked what he had weighed it against. Duncan did not have an answer that could hold weight. Marlowe emerged from the private room when the corridor conversation had grown audible enough to reach her. She appeared with a glass in her hand and the expression of someone who expects explanations to arrive on demand. Lawrence introduced himself by title. She recalibrated immediately, her voice shifting into the register she used with people she considered worth addressing directly. "I trust there's no issue with our reservation," she said. Lawrence told her that the room her party was occupying had been confirmed to a prior guest, that the reassignment had not followed the restaurant's stated booking policy, and that the corporate liaison who had processed her request had not been authorized to override a standing reservation. Marlowe looked past him toward the main hall. Conrad was still at the window table with Ivy. He had not turned around. "I'm sure this is a misunderstanding," she said. "My relationship with this restaurant group goes back years." Lawrence said the relationship was noted. He also said it did not authorize the cancellation of another guest's confirmed reservation without consent or notification. Marlowe's tone shifted. She mentioned the 14 units, the clients, the revenue the dinner represented. She said that the man at the window table had not been meaningfully inconvenienced, that the main hall was a perfectly reasonable alternative. Lawrence said that adequacy was not the standard. The standard was whether the guest had received what he had booked and confirmed 3 weeks in advance. Marlowe looked at him with the frustrated precision of someone whose conclusions have gone unchallenged for a long time. "I'd like to know," she said carefully, "exactly who that man is." Lawrence did not answer the question directly. He said the review of the modification would be completed before any further determination was made about the evening. Marlowe returned to the private room. She did not finish her dinner. Conrad came to stand with Lawrence only when asked, and only after he had made sure Ivy was settled with a dessert menu and a promise from Dara that the kitchen had something with chocolate that she was going to like. He stood in the corridor beside the reservation records. He confirmed the details, the arrival, the conversation with Duncan, the room that had been shown to them and then taken away, the flowers that were still arranged on the table inside. Lawrence asked what he wanted done. Conrad said he wanted the reservation record corrected and the modification process documented. He wanted the corporate liaison who had submitted the Easton request, knowing it conflicted with a prior confirmed booking, identified and reviewed. He asked that Duncan's handling of the situation be formally examined, not informally closed. He paused. "I also want to know if this has happened before," he said. "Whether there's a pattern of confirmed reservations being moved for corporate accounts without guest notification. If there is, I want it documented properly, not resolved on paper and forgotten." Lawrence looked at him for a moment. "You're not asking for the room back," he said. "The evening is mostly gone," Conrad said. "The room doesn't repair anything." He glanced toward the main hall, where Ivy was studying the dessert menu with the focused seriousness of someone taking the decision very personally. What repairs something is making sure the next family that books a table for something that matters to them actually gets what they were promised. The review moved quickly because the records were intact. The corporate liaison was found to have rerouted 2 other confirmed reservations in the past 4 months under similar circumstances, accepting verbal assurances from account managers without documented approval. Duncan had been aware of one prior instance and had marked it resolved without any guest follow-up. Duncan's employment was suspended pending a formal review. The corporate liaison was placed on administrative leave. Marlowe Easton's party finished their dinner and left before the process concluded. No one asked them to go. There was no scene. The private dining room was simply not offered to the Easton account again, and the corporate relationship was placed under compliance review. Dara was asked whether she had observed anything. She described what she had seen at the reservation podium, the confirmation Conrad had provided, the moment Ivy looked at the closed private room door, the envelope on the table. She had saved nothing, recorded nothing. She had simply paid attention and remembered. Conrad recommended her to Meridian's hospitality recognition program. He said she had understood her job better than the people who held authority over her. Before they left, Conrad and Ivy stood in the corridor near the private dining room. The white flowers were still on the table inside. The candles had burned low. Ivy had finished the chocolate dessert and held the envelope against her chest again. She looked at the door. "Can we still give her the card?" she asked. Conrad opened the door. The room was empty, dishes cleared, chairs pushed back into place. The flowers were still at the center of the table. They sat down together at the table that had been reserved for them 3 weeks ago. Ivy set the envelope beside the flowers and smoothed it flat with her palm. She did not open it. She just left it there, On the white tablecloth in the low candlelight, next to the arrangement that had been placed because someone had been told this was the kind of dinner that mattered. After a long while, Ivy leaned her head against her father's arm. She would have liked tonight, she said. Not the bad part, the part where you didn't get mean. Conrad put his arm around her shoulders. Outside the frosted glass, the sound of the main dining hall continued, the ordinary, unhurried rhythm of an evening. Inside the private room, it was quiet. Your mom taught me that, he said. Ivy looked at the card. I know, she said. She taught me too. They stayed until the candles had burned nearly all the way down. On the way out, Conrad stopped and asked for Dara. When she came out of the kitchen, he thanked her for the flower. She said it was nothing. He told her it wasn't nothing at all. Then he and Ivy walked out into the evening, past the valet stand and the amber glow of the street lamps, and Ivy took his hand and matched his pace, and neither of them spoke. Because some nights, everything that needed saying had already been said, and what was left was only the quiet of the walk home.